Some fun! Huh, Bambi? Come on, get up. Kinda wobbly, aren't you?
Hi, let's talk about friction. You just saw Bambi skittering across the ice. The idea of friction, particularly in an organization, particularly when we start looking at huge goals that we set for ourselves, what you're going to invariably find is that you're going to be running into what you could call friction. Another way of framing that, another way of talking about that, and another way of thinking about it is conflict. Now, my experience with most organizations and with most people in most organizations is that we tend to shy away from conflict. Now, here's what's very interesting about this notion, and this is one of the reasons that I had you kind of take a look at the Bambi video right up front here. Without friction, Bambi's literally not going anywhere, particularly not going anywhere with an intention of getting somewhere, skittering all around that ice. The reason that Bambi doesn't get any traction is because there is no friction between Bambi's hooves and that sheet of ice. Thumper has got a little bit more friction going on with this fur and whatnot. But here's the point that I want to make about this. Without friction, there is no movement. And you put the word friction, set it aside, and use the word conflict. Conflict is natural in an organization that is growing. Conflict is natural in an organization that is challenging itself. Now, that conflict is going to take a number of different forms. One is the most obvious, which is the interpersonal conflict that you're probably going to find yourself engaging in. The other is the conflict that you have with your mindset. Your mindset, your paradigm about what's possible is going to push back, and there's going to be tension. That's another word for friction, by the way, is tension. There's going to be tension between what was and what could be. That conflicted component that you experience is actually hugely good news. Without friction, there is no movement. Without conflict, an appropriate kind of conflict, there is no movement. Now, just if you take this in terms of physics as an example, friction will generate heat. I mean, just kind of rub your hands together like this. Friction generates heat. It also heat translates itself into light. So stretching the metaphor here just a bit, you will have heat and you will have light when you have conflict. Too much heat, problem. Not enough heat, not enough light. The light is what we use to illuminate our way forward. Now think about it in that way. When I embrace conflict as a natural part of growth and evolution, I actually begin to celebrate its presence, and I begin to look at how can I use conflict most effectively as I and we, our team, starts moving towards that enormous goal that we've set for ourselves, it scares us to death. We've never been there before. Those sorts of ideas that scare us are going to generate conflict when we start looking at how we collaborate together to get there. Once we've agreed on the outcome, said that it's valuable, we've each integrated in ourselves why it's important to us, then what we do is we start moving forward. Leadership is the activity of influencing others in order to co-create coordinated movement towards a worthy ideal. Couple pieces on this. One is influence. Influence here has to do with taking the chevrons off, taking the stripes off, and just being who you are in a way that causes the kind of movement that you'd like to have. The Army, well, most military units actually, after war games or after they've been out doing whatever they do, they will have what they call an after-action review. An after-action review is where, again, you take the epaulets off, you take the chevrons off, and you sit down without rank and you look at and unbundle what happened. It's a backward-looking exercise in assessing what did we do right, what did we do wrong, what can we do to improve next time we do this. I'm going to suggest that what we do going forward is a pre-action review. Epaulets come off, chevrons come off, we're all in this together. And once we've agreed on what we want to produce, the goal, the objective, and we're each bought into it, then we can have literally appropriate conflict as we start discussing how we get there. And part of the pre-action review is setting in place ground rules. How do I bring something to the table? How do I challenge the person that is my leader? All of these sorts of things. How do we bring assumptions up that haven't been explored? What are the sacred cows that can justifiably be brought to the table and looked at and assessed? Is this going to continue to be a sacred cow, or do we want to put it out of its misery, put it out of our misery, and move forward? That will generate conflict, I will guarantee it. Without conflict, you don't have heat. Without heat, you don't have light. So what I'm looking at inviting you to do as you set yourself on path towards 2024 is to find ways to actually master your ability to engage conflict. Master your ability to bring friction into the process in enough ways and with enough moderation and enough appropriateness that you generate the heat necessary to keep things engaged. And you also generate the light necessary to illuminate what am I not seeing that I could actually be addressing that I haven't actually noticed before. Now, there's a notion here when we start looking at this notion of challenge, because that's essentially what we're doing is we're challenging the status quo. We're challenging our mindsets. We're challenging the people around us. What's too much? What's too little? I can come in with a head of steam and be like a bull in a china shop. Or I can come in so passively that nobody even notices my passing. Now, the metaphor I want to end with is this idea of a bow wake. Now, a bow wake, if you watch any boat moving through the water, there's a push of water that precedes it. Every single boat moving through the water will generate a bow wake. And what a bow wake is basically resistance as the boat moves through the water. It's pushing water. If the bow wake is too much, too large, a couple of things happen here. One is if you're moving through a marina, you're going to be tossing other boats around. You're going to actually piss off a lot of people. The other is that it's a sign about how much resistance there is in the structure, in the system, in the process as you move through the water. You have a bow wake. Each one of us has a bow wake as we move through our organizations. How you bring something to the table, your bow wake precedes you. It's an energetic. So you want to become aware of and mindful of what your bow wake is, because it is a way that resistance is produced. And you want to be able to moderate that. What's too much? What's too little? How do I bring this to the table? How do I approach this person? How do I mark out something that might be a sacred cow that could be useful to explore? Do we want to leave this in place any longer? Those sorts of things come into play. So as you look at this boat going through the water, this bow wake that precedes it, just know that it is really generating friction as it moves through the water. And it's that friction that is necessary in large part to the forward momentum of the boat. Conflict is your best friend. You want to be able to engage it. You want to be able to use it. You want to be able to leverage it. Conflict with your mindset as you wrestle with your sense of self. Am I the kind of person that can do this? Are we the kind of team that can do this? But also conflict in the sense of finding out ways to get from point A to point B. You don't want to necessarily have conflict once you've landed on what it is that you say is important. That's inappropriate conflict at the end of the day. Once you've agreed on where you're going to have conflict about how you get there. And that's the illuminating piece. What's the most effective? What's the most useful? What's the most elegant way that we can go about doing this? And elegance becomes essentially the litmus for what you want to be able to produce. Minimal unintended consequences. You don't want to eliminate conflict. You don't want to eliminate friction. What you do want to create is elegant movement. Hope this has been useful.